Just check.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are good to start, and I hope whoever is not here yet will join us soon. Jaideep, so we have one of our fellows from the like the STEM Champion program, which we are running for students from rural remote colleges. So Diksha, she's an undergraduate student in Pithoragarh, and she's a third year BSc student, and she's studying zoology, botany, and chemistry. And presently, she's doing interesting projects mapping ecological diversity of the region in Pithoragarh, with support from her mentors who are based in Leeds University. So Vigyanshala is sort of catalyzing and connecting students across the board, like people who are sitting across the globe. And why I'm introducing Diksha, because she'll be the one who will be moderating the session today. So, and before I do that, a bit about Vigyanshala. So Vigyanshala is on a mission to bridge the access, attainability, and quality gap in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, as well as the skill gap that exists for the students who come out of completing a tertiary level education in these subjects. We are an ecosystem builder, so we are addressing two main challenges in STEM education ecosystem. The first one is the rural and urban divide, where we have 6 out of 10 colleges in India in rural parts of the country, which are very resource starved, as well as suffer from a acute shortage of teachers as well. So we are bridging the colleges with the knowledge and the resource pool that exists globally through our mentoring platform, and we nurture students in with support from their teachers there. The second gap that Vigyan Shala is addressing is the gender gap in STEM through its program Kalpana, which aims to reimagine STEM disciplines with increased participation of women. We've set ourselves an audacious goal that by 2035 we want to bring 50% parity in STEM disciplines, and that's why we are anchoring our intervention to undergraduates, because after undergraduate degree in STEM is where a huge leaky pipeline is observed. So thank you for joining us today. We have both our students from the Kalpana program as well as the STEM Champions program, Rural STEM Champions program, joining us today. So without taking much time, over to you, Diksha. Please introduce the speaker for the day.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So hello everyone, I'm Diksha and I'm so excited to be here. This is my first time moderating on such a big level, so please bear with me. So uh, Jaideep Prabhu is Professor of Marketing at Jawaharlal Nehru Professor of Indian Business and Enterprise and Director of the Center of India and Global Business at Judge Business School, University of Cambridge. He has published in and is on the editorial board of leading journals such as the Journal of Marketing. He has appeared on BBC News 24, BBC Radio 4, and a Boomerang Business Week, and has been profiled in Business Week. He is the co-author of Jugaad Innovation, Think Frugal, Be Flexible, Generate Breakthrough Growth, described by The Economist as the most comprehensive book yet. On the subject of frugal innovation, his 2015 book, Frugal Innovation, How to Do Better with
Diksha, we lost you. Can you unmute yourself? I think something happened. You may need to repeat from, like, he's the co-author of Jugaad Innovations.
sorry, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the co-author of Jugaad Innovation, Think Frugal, Be Flexible, Generate Breakthrough Growth, described by The Economist as the most comprehensive book yet. On the subject of frugal innovation, his 2015 book, Frugal Innovation, How to Do Better with Less, won the CMI's Management Book of the Year Award 2016. His most recent book, How Should a Government Be? The New Levels of State Power, was published in February 2021. In this talk, Professor Prabhu will discuss how the phenomenon of frugal innovation, the creation of faster, better, and cheaper solutions that employ minimal resources, which was once the preserve of the developing world, is now taking off in the West as well. He will argue that frugal innovation holds the key to driving global growth by employing more people creatively and solving some of the big problems of poverty and inequality that stalk the planet. So I welcome you, and we are so excited to have you on board. Over to you.
And thank you, Darshana, and hello, everyone. It's really a wonderful pleasure to be with you today. I'm a huge admirer of what you are doing together and individually, and it's really a pleasure for me to be with you today. Let me share my screen so we can go into my lecture. I will speak for maybe about 15 minutes or so, and then we can have a discussion, and then I will return to my slides and speak for the remaining time, and then we'll have a discussion again. So the title of my talk is about frugal innovation. I've spent my career studying innovation. In the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western companies because the understanding was that's where innovation happens. And then I became interested in innovation in emerging markets like India, where I'd grown up. And when I went to India to study innovation and talking to innovators there, I was very surprised to see how their approach is so different from their Western corporate counterparts. So first, they are very frugal in how they innovate. They make use of the limited resources they have in very creative ways. And that requires a lot of flexible thinking, a lot of lateral thinking and improvisation. And also, many of their solutions seem inclusive. They seem designed to bring people who are outside the formal economy into the formal economy. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Here is a innovation we might think of as, something special for a rich country. This is a high-end fridge that will talk to you, and you can talk to through this tablet PC. And for that, you pay about $3,000. Now, you may see something like this in India, but you're equally likely to see something like this. So this expensive fridge is $3,000. This clay fridge, Mitticool, is less than $30. And I'll tell you more about the innovator. His approach is very frugal, flexible, and inclusive. Here is another example. This is an incubator. It's a beautiful machine. It has all the bells and whistles from a company like GE, but it's $25,000. And at that price, it's really beyond the reach of many people, particularly those in rural clinics. They will not be able to afford this. Even if somebody gives them these machines, they will not be able to maintain them, and they may not have access to electricity. In a situation like that, something like this may be very powerful. So the incubator is $25,000. The baby warmer, this one here, is less than $100. Now, of course, it's not an incubator. It doesn't have an oxygen tent, but it is designed to address a large part of the problem that the incubator is solving. A problem of infant mortality, where if an infant is born 1 or 2 weeks prematurely, they cannot maintain their body temperature. In some cases, they may die or may be very badly affected for the rest of their lives. This baby warmer will save them. Now, interestingly for you, and keep this in mind, the baby warmer was not developed by a large company. It was developed by 4 students at Stanford who took a course called Design for Extreme Affordability. And the objective of the course was to come up with a working prototype that is 1/100th the cost of the existing solution. And the students could take any problem. They took this problem of infant mortality. They came up with this for their course. When they left Stanford, they went on to test this with mothers and midwives in rural India. They got venture capital backing from Stanford, and then they were ready to roll it out. They did clinical trials testing. They were ready to roll it out. And at that point, they hit a wall because they didn't have a sales force. But then they entered into a partnership with GE Healthcare, and GE Salesforce helped them to commercialize it. So these are some of the possibilities now where young people, often students, can do a large part of the innovation process. So my co-authors and I, we talk to lots of people like this, not only in India and other countries too. And in India, when we ask people how they would describe this frugal, flexible, inclusive approach, they would often use the Hindi word Jugaad. So my co-authors and I, we wrote a book called Jugaad Innovation, where we define this as the art of overcoming harsh constraints by improvising an effective solution. So it's not a perfect solution, it's a good enough solution, but importantly, it's a solution that makes the best use of limited resources in that place. And after we published this book, a lot of people from other parts of the world said, oh, we have something similar in our country. So the Brazilians said that they had two words to describe this kind of approach. And you see it not only in emerging markets, but you also see it in developed countries in the West. And so in the second half of my lecture, I will talk about frugal innovation in the West as well. So what we do in the book is we look at lots of examples, and then we try to understand what are some of the key principles that are driving these innovators. And here are the 6 principles we identify. First, they are very good at finding opportunity in adverse circumstances. So necessity is the mother of invention. Actually, difficult situations give people interesting, creative ideas. Many of their solutions are very good at doing more with less. So they will look at what resources they have, and they will use those resources to substitute for resources they don't have. There is a lot of lateral thinking and flexibility in the mindset. The idea is that if we cannot climb the mountain, we'll find a way around the mountain. The solutions are simple. The simplicity of the design helps to reduce the cost and make good use of resources, but it also helps you to ensure that the solution is easy to adopt, maintain, and use. Fifth, they are including people who are marginal, not only as beneficiaries or users or customers, but also as part of the solution. And I'll give you some examples. And finally, they are very passionate about what they're doing. They really believe in what they're doing, and that's very important because what they're doing is not easy. So here are some examples of people we talk about in the book. And I'll start with Mansukh Bhai. He's the person behind the clay fridge, the Mitticool. He comes from a village in Gujarat. You may know that Gujarat had a very serious earthquake in 2001. A lot of people lost their household possessions, including the clay, clay pots in which they store water. And he said that one day he opened the local newspaper, and there was a picture of someone's matka which was broken, and the caption read, "Poor man's fridge broken." And they were making a joke, but from that he actually got the idea to make a poor man's fridge. He said, why don't I make a box of clay where in the top you can keep water, you can store it like in a matka, and the water will be cool, you can even drink it from the tap. But when it evaporates through the walls, it can also keep fruit and vegetables fresh for up to 5 days in a hot climate. And so he is a very good example of all those 6 principles. First of all, he got his idea from the adversity of the earthquake. Then he does more with less, using resources he has like clay, water, etc., his own skills. 3, a lot of this. 4, his solution is very simple, as you can see. 5th, he involved local people. They were not only consumers of his fridge. He also trained local women. They could make these fridges in his factory. They could earn an additional income. And finally, you can see him on YouTube talking about all his different inventions. He's so passionate about what he's doing. You may have heard of Arunachalam Muruganantham. He's like Mansukh Bhai from the south, from Coimbatore. And he spent many years developing a machine to make sanitary pads and to make them affordable. And then he takes these machines to rural communities. He trains local women to operate these machines. make sanitary pads, package them, brand them, and market them. So these are some of the possibilities, things that are coming from grassroots India, which you can tap into. But then you also have people in cities. So you have Dr. Mohan. He is a diabetes specialist from Chennai. Diabetes is a very serious problem in cities. But in cities, people can go to clinics like his and get treatment. They can even afford to pay for the treatment. So he has a very successful private practice in Chennai. But he's aware that in the countryside, in villages, there are a lot of people who don't know what diabetes is or whether they have diabetes. Even if they have it, they don't know what to do about it. They will not go to the city for treatment. It's too far away. It's expensive. And his doctors from the city will not go to the village. So they will not relocate with their families. So he worked with the World Diabetes Foundation. They gave him this van. They gave him the equipment in the van, which you see here. He worked with ISRO. They gave him this satellite dish. The van goes from village to village. It stops. People like this lady from the village, she steps into the van. She looks through the eyepiece. The image is broadcast via satellite to the doctor sitting in the city. You can see it on his computer screen, and he can make an instant diagnosis, which he then communicates to this person who's a local health volunteer. So he's very important. People like this are selected from villages by Dr. Mohan. They go to the city for a few days of training. Then they come back and they perform a very important local role. You see this in many areas of healthcare. You may have heard of Aravind Eye Hospitals in Tamil Nadu. They do this. This is Dr. Devi Shetty from Bangalore, who does this with cardiac surgery. They apply many of the principles of scientific management, like economies of scale. Basically, they do time and motion studies. They identify all the steps involved in cardiac surgery. They find those steps which only the doctor can do, so the doctor does that. And all the other steps can be done by nurses, paramedics, the family, or even the patient themselves. And in this way, they are able to do a very large number of cardiac operations every day, and they are able to reduce the price to almost about a maximum about $1,000 per surgery. Now, in other areas, like this is energy, solar lighting. This is an example of Celco, Solar Electric Lighting Company, set up by Harish Hande in Bangalore. Harish was an engineer who studied in IIT and then the US. And then he set up this company to sell solar lights to people who are either living in urban slums or in the countryside who typically use kerosene. And he said that the best lesson in life he learned was from a fruit cart vendor, someone who would be his potential customer. She told him that 300 rupees a day was too much, but 10 rupees a day was not. And he realized that a lot of people he was trying to reach were like the fruit cart vendor. She would wake up in the morning, take a loan from a local money lender. With the loan, she would buy fruit and vegetables, which she would sell during the day. With the money she made, she would repay the money lender with interest, and then she would buy food for her family. And then if she had 10 rupees left over, she would buy kerosene for lighting. So he, with that insight, he then said, working backwards, okay, how can I provide solar lighting to someone like that at 10 rupees a day? And so this is his solution. He works with people like this from the local community, people he identifies. He trains them to maintain the batteries, panels, and lights. Then Harish worked with a bank to give people like that loans, which he guarantees for 6 months. With the loan, this person sets up shop. He buys the batteries, panels, and lights. He charges the batteries during the day, and in the evening, he rents them to people like the fruit cart vendor, who can then, instead of buying kerosene, pay 10 rupees to get a much better quality light, a solar light, much brighter, doesn't cause fires or fumes. If she has a business at home, she can work longer and earn more money, and her children can study. So she is better off, but so too is this person, because after 6 months, he has a credit history and he's in the banking system with a business. So you see a lot of these startups, these social enterprises, smaller organizations. But you also see large organizations, including multinationals, doing this kind of Jugaad or frugal innovation in countries like India and China. So GE has its largest R&D center in the world in Bangalore, where they are doing lots of different things, including medical devices. And they realized that typically, say they are making an ECG machine, they would take an ECG machine that they have built for Western hospitals. They would maybe take off a few features, reduce the price a bit, and then sell it to hospitals in urban India. But that's only a small part of the market. A huge part of the Indian market is in the countryside, and there the clinics will not be able to afford those big machines. Usually, a doctor will go from the city to the country on a day trip. And so the device would have to look like this. It would have to be highly affordable. It would have to be portable, fit in a doctor's bag. It would have to be battery operated. It would have to be very robust. So they knew what the specification would have to be. And then they went one step further and they said, okay, instead of doing everything like we usually do, everything in-house and where we own the intellectual property, that would take a lot of time, that would be expensive and so on. Let's do Jugaad. Let's work backwards from what we need and let's use off-the-shelf components to do that. So we need a printer. Let's use bus ticket printers. We can even use the paper they use, that's cheaper. We need keypads, where telephones have keypads, we can use that. Let's just combine those. We'll apply a quality control standard and we'll have a product faster, better, cheaper. That's exactly what they did in India. They did the same thing in China. And now these products have also got FDA approval in the West and are selling in the West. Siemens also has a very large R&D center in Bangalore, and they are also doing many of these kinds of frugal innovations. For instance, instead of using ultrasound to test the status of the fetal heart, ultrasound is very expensive and requires a technician. They are using a microphone technology to do that. It's much cheaper and much easier to use. In telecoms, for many years, companies like Nokia did this kind of frugal innovation, and that's how they dominated emerging markets. This device was developed by Nokia specifically for people living in urban slums, like in Dharavi in Mumbai. They noticed that in the late 90s, people in slums were buying mobile phones, even though they were expensive. But because it was such an expensive device, they would buy it and then immediately cover it in plastic to protect the mobile phone. And then because they did not have electricity at night, they would often use the light in the phone to see their way in the dark. So they took those insights and came up with this new design, very robust, affordable phone that also had a dustproof keypad and a built-in torch. And that made it a hugely popular device. Before the iPod, this was the most successful consumer electronics device. And now, of course, around the world, you have, almost everybody now has access to a mobile phone, even in rural areas. And companies are now using those mobile phones to deliver all kinds of services to people in rural areas. So this is a service, M-Pesa, which was introduced in Kenya by Vodafone in 2007, which would allow a lady from a village in Kenya to use her basic phone to call her son, who may be studying in Nairobi, and not only talk to him, but ask him to send money home. And he could do that by texting it to her. She would receive that text message on her phone, and then she could cash that in the local Kirana shop, which was the M-Pesa agent. So this enabled things like financial inclusion for people who are not in the banking system in a very frugal way. You're just using what is already there. People already have mobile phones. They're already texting. They have Kirana shops in their villages. They just connect the dots to deliver this service. And now there are millions of people just in Kenya, and of course it has spread to many other countries, who can use their phone to send and receive money and make micro payments. So the problem that Harish Hande has in India of 300 rupees a month is too much, but 10 rupees a day is not, is solved in Kenya because this company M-Kopa, which makes a solar lighting kit like this, can sell this kit to somebody in a village in Kenya. That person may not have money. They may not have the liquidity to pay upfront cash. They may not have access to a bank to get a loan, but they can pay off the upfront cost in weekly micro installments using M-Pesa with their mobile phone, as if they are paying for lights on a weekly basis. And that helps them but it also helps the company, because the company then doesn't have to send somebody to the village every week to collect the payment. So these are some of the things we wrote about in our Jugaad book, which came out in 2012, which was very much about emerging markets. So I'm going to stop my sharing there, and we can have a quick discussion. If you have any comments or questions, let's discuss them now.
I just wanted to add one thing. If anybody has any comments, questions, please raise hand and unmute yourself. I can moderate who is talking from here. So yeah, or you can post questions in the WhatsApp group so I can read them out as well. Okay, Ashi has a question. Go ahead, Ashi, unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, we usually say that there is no alternative for what is best. So, is the statement contrary to our Jugaad? Like what we innovate, definitely it is very good. It is, it is means everyone can afford it, and it is easier to experiment with it. But still, we say that there is no alternative for what is best.
Right.
So, what?
Yes. So, I think it's often said, don't let the best be the enemy of the good. So that's the philosophy I take. Of course, you can come up with a perfect solution, but to come up with a perfect solution, and in fact, to just get that last 20% to get to perfect, would probably require 80% more resources. So, using that 80-20 rule, I say use 20% of the resources to get 80% of the outcome. Now, that may not be a permanent solution, but in a crisis, for instance, now with a pandemic, when time is so crucial, not just money, but time is important. You cannot afford to wait till you get the perfect solution. Good enough is sometimes the best in a situation like that. So that would be my take, and I think that's very consistent with a Jugaad mindset. Now, that doesn't mean that you should settle for anything goes. So that's at the flip side. That doesn't mean you should just go for 50% or 20%. Try to get to as much with as little. That is the Jugaad approach, I would say, the ideal Jugaad approach.
Thank you, Jaideep, for that answer. Prachi is here. Prachi, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It was a really great talk. I work for research and innovation in Germany, and what I see is one really big and most expensive part of innovation is patenting. So, how does that fit into frugal innovation?
Thank you, Prachi. Very good question. And actually, when I was talking about the GE ECG machine, for instance, an important part of their approach was to completely sidestep the whole patenting approach. That would have been that traditional approach. Typically, large companies, as I said, like GE, would do everything in-house with a big R&D team budget. They would try and own all the IP. They would apply for all the patenting and so on. But they realize that in many cases that is counterproductive because it takes time and it takes resources and it also adds cost. So instead, they were inspired by many of their Chinese and Indian competitors who sidestepped IP by basically taking off the shelf components and combining what is already there and what is accessible, rather than trying to come up with something new or having to license something that's owned by someone else. So a lot of the frugal approach is about taking resources that are already there and joining the dots. And they sidestep patenting, which is potentially expensive and time consuming.
Thank you, Jaideep, for that answer. So I have a question. I'm wondering, like, how does someone who is studying, say, undergraduate courses, how can they inculcate a Jugaad mindset? Like, where should they start from?
Great question, Darshana. I'll be giving some examples in a minute. I already talked about, for instance, the students from Stanford who came up with the baby warmer as part of their course. They were not probably undergraduates. I think some of them are master students. But essentially, there is a course at Stanford where the entire objective of the course is to come up with a working prototype that's 100 the cost. So they learn by doing. It's not book knowledge, it's not taking exams. They actually have to do something. Now, a lot of undergraduate programs, I think particularly those in science and tech, will have such projects, they'll have such courses. They may have summer internships. There are many opportunities to learn by doing. And often those are not just individual, they're in groups. So I'm a big believer in team-based work, having a group of 4 to 5 people, ideally with diverse skills, not just technical skills, but also potentially social science skills or business skills, entrepreneurial skills. These teams can achieve a lot in a short period of time, ideally working on a real problem with a real client or customer, shall we say. So all our programs in Cambridge in the business school have these learning by doing components. And even if it's not part of your curriculum, as I said, it may be extracurricular, you can always form student organizations. So in Cambridge, we have student organizations that are specifically focused on these kinds of initiatives, where outside of the classroom, outside of the curriculum, over the academic year, they have competitions on particular themes. So maybe this year it's on healthcare, medtech. So any team can form of 4 to 5 students. They can compete in a challenge, in a competition where they present their solution to some problem. Let's say it's about vaccine rollout or whatever it is. They will present their solution often in some kind of prototype form. They might win some money. With that money, they can then continue testing. There are make spaces where they can go and actually tinker, maybe come up with an improved prototype and so on. I will give an example of some of these companies that have been formed by students themselves using these resources that are available now to people not only in educational institutions but also in their communities.
Thank you, Jaideep, for that answer. I think to this end, I would just like to mention it for our fellows as well, that the second part of Kalpana Fellowship, which is after 8 weeks, is where we are going to put them into very diverse teams as well, and they will pick up a project or a problem that they would like to solve. So I think in that sense, your talk today serves as a perfect pitch, in the sense to why take that aspect of the program seriously. So thank you for elaborating it so beautifully today. We have some more questions. Somebody posted on the WhatsApp group, like Sudiksha. So she's asking, how can we wisely judge the practicality of a potential innovation? What factors must be taken into consideration other than cost and availability?
Okay, so that's a great question. Why don't I continue with my presentation? Some of that question may be addressed in my remaining presentation. If it's not addressed, we can come back to it when I've finished the presentation. Okay?
So we have two more questions, if that's okay, before you carry on. So Ravleen for, and once Ravleen is done, maybe Anshika Agrawal. So
okay.
So Ravleen, go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think that this question may be not relevant to this, but I have always had this curiosity that since there is so much problem with waste management and we are just applying so many of the techniques, so I always wonder, can something like such be done that we just accumulate so much of the waste together, just stick it somehow, and because we have technologies and fuels to send some of the things into space, can't we just manage waste this way?
Great idea. So first of all, Rablin, that's a very important question about waste. We produce a lot of waste, which is a resource. And so how can we reuse, recycle, and even upcycle waste? I will actually give some examples in the next half of my presentation about precisely that. And we have some very interesting, actually student-led initiatives in India. One of them well, has a very nice title, Kabad Se Jugaad, you know. So there are many such things we can do with waste. And let's see, some examples I will present in the next half.
Thank you, Jaideep. Anshika, you can go next with your question, and that's the last question we will take now.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I want to ask that we study about nanotechnology. So, does this nanotechnology also come under the realm of Jugaad innovation? Because there we also deal with the things like reducing the space a particular device occupy and all other such things. So, does it also come under the realm of Jugaad innovation?
Great question, Anshika. And absolutely, a lot of technologies that come out of the lab enable us to do things faster, better, and cheaper. And but the question is not about, usually it's not about the technology per se, it's about the problem you're trying to solve. That's the only thing I would say, is don't start typically with, oh, nanotechnology, let me see if I can come up with a frugal innovation with nanotechnology. Look at the problem you're trying to solve and then ask yourself, is nanotechnology suitable for this? And if so, how? So, for instance, this is what Harish Hande realized himself. He wanted initially, he was very excited about renewable energy, and he thought, solar, that will solve all the world's problems. But then he realized that, there is a simple question of affordability for many people. For them, it's not about solar this or wind that. It's about, how do I afford lighting? Given my situation, given I only have 10 rupees a day, how can I afford lighting? From that understanding, he then worked backwards and said, okay, can solar then solve that problem of lighting for 10 rupees a day? If yes, then solar is a good technology. Now, Tata's asked a similar question about water filtration. They said, can we come up with a really good, reliable water filter that is also affordable? And then they used nanotechnology. Rice husk in their filter, in the Swatch water filter, uses nanotechnology. But it is after you think about the problem, then you look for the right technology. Now, often science does not proceed that way. Science proceeds from the textbook, so to speak, or what's happening in the lab. And that's not bad. That's not bad at all, because that's how we get progress. But it's not often enough to just try and push a scientific idea into the market, because the market may not be ready. So often it is better to start with really understanding what is the need in the marketplace, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then work backwards and say, do we have a technology that can solve the problem?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so let me return to my presentation now, and hopefully it will answer some of the other questions that you had, and then we can have a discussion again when I'm done. So I was talking before we took the break about the developing world, countries like India, and the book Jugaad Innovation, which was very much about, as I said, India, and that was in 2012. So after that book came out, we realized there was a lot of interest in frugal innovation in the West for the West. So my co-authors and I then started to look at this, and we realized that in the West, there was a new group of consumers we called prosumers, because they were not just passive recipients of products and services from companies. They were much more actively involved in the socio-economic process, and they were driving at least three movements that underpin a frugal economy. One is the sharing economy, where now ordinary people like you and me, we can directly trade spare assets, like a spare room in our house, with each other on some platform like Airbnb. Then there is the maker movement. I'll talk a lot about that. This is where now small teams, sometimes the students, and Darshana and I were just talking about this, and this was a question as well, and this is the second part of your Kalpana program. Small teams can now do things that only big companies or the government could have done 10 or 20 years ago. And not only in software, but also in hardware. And I'll talk a bit about that. And then the third is the circular economy. The question that we just had about waste management is totally relevant to this, where increasingly now we are reducing, reusing, and recycling all the resources that go into making products and services. So these are the movements. Let me talk about the sharing economy first. So if you're talking about something like rental, a rental of a room in your house to somebody else, now that sharing economy sector was pretty small in 2013 relative to traditional rental. But by 2025, it's expected to grow very dramatically. It's going to grow exponentially. So how does this kind of model take off so fast? How does it scale so fast? It scales so fast because it is fundamentally frugal. It is asset light. So Brian Chesky, who is the CEO of Airbnb, he says, Airbnb is competing with hotel chains like Marriott. Hotel chains will have to physically build rooms. If they want to add capacity of 30,000 rooms, say in a year, they will have to physically build that. That takes time, money, resources, people, etc. Airbnb can create that capacity in just 2 weeks. Why? Because they're not creating anything new. It's already there in people's homes. People only have to put that resource on the digital platform. So that's the essence of the sharing economy, and it is essentially frugal. Now let's turn to the maker movement. And this is what I was saying about small teams. So this is a team of students who graduated as undergraduates from University of Northwestern in Chicago. Uh, they call themselves Design for America. This is one of them, Liz Kerber. She, I think, had a background in engineering, but some of her team had a background in design and some had in business. And they formed this organization called Design for America. And they said, if you want to solve big problems in the world, you don't have to go to Africa or Asia. There are lots of problems in the US, like this problem of hospital-acquired infections, where people actually go to hospital to get cured, but they pick up an infection there, and something like 100,000 people die in the hospital every year. So they said, what can we do about that? They went to their local hospital in Chicago. They talked to doctors and nurses, a lot of observation. They realized the doctors and nurses really care about hygiene, but there are many moments in the day when they cannot go to a wall unit to dispense the gel or wash their hands. So these four students, former students, went back to their studio, their basic computing equipment, software, they have a 3D printer, and they brainstormed. And they said, okay, what would a kid do? The kid would probably just wipe his hands on his trousers, okay? So what if we could take that wall unit, which has the gel, and have it clip onto the doctors and nurses' uniforms? Then they can just, while they're walking, dispense the gel. So in their studio, they came up with this prototype, which you see here, the Swipe Sense, a little device which basically dispenses gel. You can clip it onto your uniform. And then every time you run your hand over it, it records the data. And at the end of the day, you can upload this data to your computer and you can see how you're performed. They came up with this device, the prototype, in their studio. Then they realized, well, we cannot manufacture this because we don't have a factory and you cannot 3D print many of these. So they outsourced the manufacturing. Somebody else makes it for them. Then they didn't have a sales force. So they said, how will we distribute this? They realized you can put it on Amazon and then Amazon will distribute it for you. They said, oh, we don't have money to finance this. They started a Kickstarter campaign. They were able to fundraise through crowdfunding money that they needed. Finally, they didn't have an advertising budget. So how would they advertise? They said, okay, there's social media. And one of them gave a TED talk, which went viral, and they got a lot of press and publicity for that. So all the things needed to come up with an idea, develop a prototype, manufacture it, and sell it could be done by four former students using things that are available to all of us. This is a former student of mine here at Cambridge, a mature student, because while he was doing his part-time MBA in the business school, he was also in the computer science department here in Cambridge as a professor responsible for student admissions. And he realized that a lot of young people in the UK were not applying to study computer science. And even if they applied, they had never opened a computer and tinkered with it. Many of them had never done any coding. So they said, what if we could come up with a basic computer? You see him holding it in his hand. It's the microprocessor. A basic one that they would have to tinker with. They would have to combine it with memory devices and displays and data, all these kinds of things. And they would have to code for it. And it would be so cheap that if they broke it, it wouldn't be a big deal. The first one was something like $30. Now they have like a $5 version as well. And they thought they would sell a few thousand. They've sold millions of these, not only to kids, but also to their parents. Often the dads are combining these with other cheap things like sensors and webcams, and they're coming up with Internet of Things devices to solve problems near them. We were talking about frugal science. Many people, like there's a guy near Cambridge, he sends these cheap computers up in a hot air balloon along with sensors and webcams, and he's able to do do-it-yourself weather reporting. So these are the possibilities. One of my other students, he took the Raspberry Pi, he gave it a cladding, he branded it CoLearnr, and he loaded it with the Khan Academy, the software. Khan Academy is the entire US school curriculum available in video form on YouTube. And Prabhu said, okay, there are many kids around the world who don't have access to the internet. They may not have access to a PC, but in their schools, they'll probably have access to a TV. So they could connect this to a TV, and then they could access all this content and do learning on their own. We carry around very sophisticated computers in our pockets, which are connected, by Wi-Fi or 3G or 5G. These can be used to develop all kinds of frugal devices. So this is a company spun out of UC Berkeley called CellScope, and they make medical devices that basically leverage a smartphone. So here you have an otoscope that fits into the audio jack of the smartphone, and then a mother can take high-resolution pictures of the inner ear of her daughter if she has an infection and send them to a consultant doctor who's somewhere else, remote. This device is a fraction of the cost of the standalone device. And of course, it enables telemedicine. They have made a whole suite of these products, including dermoscopes and other such devices. 3D printers are increasingly affordable. This one is less than $200. So some households can afford it. But even if you cannot afford one in your house, you can go to spaces in your community. These could be called tech shops, or make spaces, or fab labs, or utter tinkering labs like you have in India. And in these spaces, you get access to all kinds of tools, like traditional tools like lathes, but also 3D digital manufacturing tools like 3D printers, laser cutters, circuit board printers, all these things. But more important, you get access to a community of like-minded tinkerers you can bounce your ideas off and get inspiration from. So this is a group of our students in Cambridge. Toby Norman was my former student in the business school. He did not have a technical background. And Alexander Gregor, she was from public health. I was telling you when Darshana asked me this question of how people can practice this, they just came together to compete in a competition by one of the student organizations here in Cambridge. And they had this idea of helping people who are doing big public health programs in countries like Bangladesh, like vaccination programs and so on. How do you identify someone in a village? They may not have their paper medical record, so how would you identify them? The name is not enough. So they thought, what if we can use the fingerprint to identify someone? We could maybe read the visual data, convert it into text data, and then text that data to the district hospital where their records are. Excuse me, where their records are, and then they can pull up the records in the district hospital and text it to the healthcare worker in the field. And so they had this idea of the device, and they won some initial money, and then they started to prototype these devices in the make space here in Cambridge. And you see all the different variants of the device that they produced over time. And they did this without much technical knowledge. They got a lot of support from local people who knew software and hardware. And then in about 3 years, they had an improved device. They set up a company. They now provide these services in many countries around the world, such as Bangladesh, Malawi, Rwanda, Ethiopia, etc. This is for students who did not have a technical background. The students from Stanford I told you about, they came up with this baby warmer. They had to do it for their course, and they had to come up with a working prototype. And they, again, did not have a technical idea of how to do this. They just had this insight that maybe it can be a blanket that the mother uses to cover the baby. But that's not enough. You need something that will keep temperature fixed. And they didn't know how to do that. They went to a tech shop near Palo Alto, near Stanford, and they were talking to somebody over there about this idea, and that person turned out to be a NASA scientist, a former NASA scientist. And he told them about these phase change materials, these waxy substances that you can heat with electricity or boiling water, and they will keep temperature fixed for a period of time. So this component is crucial. Without this, that device will not work. This is Jane Chen, one of those 4 students with Barack Obama when he was president. And when he was president, he actually championed this kind of movement. He hosted a maker fair in the White House where people like Jane Chen and her team came to demonstrate all the things that they were able to do using all these kinds of tools. And you can see what Obama sees in this. He says, okay, this kind of do-it-yourself, it sounds like just tinkering and playing, but potentially this can be a new type of manufacturing, new made in America. And if we think about Make in India, this is a huge opportunity here for us to come up with a new kind of manufacturing that's more decentralized, distributed, where even people in villages or in city centers can make things in micro factories. And this maker movement now is very big around the world. Cities around the world are competing with each other to host this. I went to the one in Rome through a couple of years ago. It was held over 3 or 4 days in a very big exhibition space. And you had thousands of people coming with their families even to see what others were doing and to also demonstrate their own inventions. So I then looked at not only how startups are doing this, but also large companies. And I wrote a follow-up book with my co-author on frugal innovation in the West for the West, looking at large companies. And we did something very similar to the Jugaad book. We looked at lots of examples and we tried to identify some principles. I won't go through all these principles. I'll just talk about this one in particular. This is the circular idea, circularity. I'll talk about how companies like Tarkett, this is a French company that makes flooring, like carpets for offices. And they have a very ambitious target to, in 10 years, become a fully circular enterprise. So instead of just selling something to you and then you will use the carpet and when it's over, you will just dump it, they will give you a service and they will retain control of the material. So they will maybe lay the carpet in a modular design. And then when some parts wear out, they will replace those parts and recycle the material. So that way they can reduce, reuse, and recycle all the materials that go into their products, and there won't be waste. I mentioned these tech shops or make spaces. Large companies like Ford, the motor company in Detroit, they partnered with Tech Shop in Detroit, and they send their engineers one afternoon a week to the tech shop just to play, just to tinker. They thought this is just good for their morale. They'll have more fun. And they did have more fun, but they also were generating more high value added patterns because they were getting more creative ideas by interacting with other people and thinking more laterally. I'll skip this example. This is how large companies like Barclays are partnering with startups. So this is just to say that large companies now often partner with startups, and that helps both the large company and the startup to do more with less. So let me just conclude now and say that, I've been studying this notion of Jugaad innovation or frugal innovation for over 10 years at least, and I've seen how it has progressed. So in the 2000s, it was really something you saw in countries like India because of resource constraints. And we wrote about that in our 2012 book on Jugaad. Then we saw that in this decade, the last decade, there was a lot of frugal innovation in the West. And as I said, we just wrote a follow-up book in 2015 about what is happening in the West. But then we realized that India and countries like that have caught up, and they are now competing or partnering with the West to do a new kind of approach to frugal innovation. So we updated our 2015 book specifically for India, and this came out in 2019, where we added a lot of new Indian cases. And I just want to share some of those Indian cases. We found that in India, you see these three pillars of sharing, making, and the circular economy. These are traditional things that we have been very good at. When I was growing up in India, we would share our toys, our books, even our clothes, school uniforms, not only with our relatives, but friends. We were very good at making. We would make our own toys, our own equipment, etc. But of course, even traditionally, if you go to villages, you have people who are very skilled in making things, working with jewelry, with wood, with metal. Farmers are very good at making things. So we have that traditionally. And of course, we are very good at recycling and reusing. Our mothers at home would recycle and reuse utensils, things to store food in and things like that. Now, the question is, how can we tap into these old traditions in the 21st century with all these new technologies available? And I think we have a new generation of Indian entrepreneurs who are doing that. They're doing frugal innovation, tapping into each of these three things: sharing, making, and circular. So this is Dr. Vishal Rao, who has come up with this voice box for people who have had throat cancer and have lost their voice. This will enable them to speak again. It's just $1. And he developed it by working with traditional makers, toy manufacturers in Channapatna, which is a small town in Karnataka, where there is many centuries of expertise in making toys. A toy manufacturer helped him to prototype and develop this voice box. This is a team from Delhi, Triton Foodworks. They are in their 20s. They are pioneering vertical farms in urban areas, which only use water and nutrients in the soil. With a lot of data, they can improve the efficiency of crops such as strawberries, tomatoes, etc., to supply restaurants in cities and grocery stores in cities. And these types of farms can be set up even in office buildings or on the roofs of buildings. This is Shailaja Rangarajan. She set up this company called Reimagined to make use of waste. The question that was asked, what can we do with waste? She asked the same question. We often waste a lot of cloth material, leather materials are wasted. She takes those waste materials. She works with traditional women from villages who are very good at crafts, and then they produce these very nice accessories for home use, which then Shailaja can sell online to people in India and abroad. Ajeta Shah is of Indian origin. She grew up in the US, and she is working with large companies that make all these kinds of devices to sell them in rural areas, using women who are from rural areas to train them to be salespeople, to sell these devices, often using cell phones in their local communities. So she's connecting multinationals with rural markets. And finally, I want to talk about Makers Asylum. I know Darshana knows them very well, and you're working with them. They are a very impressive group team. Initially in Mumbai, now they're in Goa. They have a maker space where they were teaching young people like you, how to develop solutions for the SDGs. Then the pandemic happened, and when the pandemic happened, they could not deliver their courses. They had the space and their time, and they were asking themselves, what can we do? And then they thought, why don't we actually start making PPE? Because this protective equipment like these visors, face shields, they are needed, and there's a shortage in our cities. Why don't we do it? So they first did it in Mumbai, and then they realized that there's a need across the country. They set a challenge. They started sharing their instructional videos. Very soon, they had 42 maker spaces from across the country, including villages, that came together to form the M19 Collective. And together, they were able to produce over 1 million shields. So that was last year. Now, with the big crisis with oxygen, lack of oxygen, they have started a new initiative called the M19 Oxy Kit, where they are producing these open source oxygen concentrators. And I know that Vigyan Shala and Darshana are working with them, and that you will have an opportunity to do this. You can set up a lab in your town where you can make these oxygen concentrators and then give them to hospitals to generate much needed oxygen for their patients. So as their slogan says, banana shuru karo. Now, this has, as I said, a lot of implications for India. We have Make in India. So the question is what to make. I would argue we need to make frugal solutions, and who to make it for. A huge internal market, particularly of lower income people in India, who have basic needs, and we can meet their basic needs with these frugal devices. That would generate growth and improve people's lives. So I'll skip over this. I'll just end by saying, based on my work over the last 10 years, I think the world really needs this kind of frugal, flexible, and inclusive innovation. I think Indian organizations can gain by engaging with Western companies and vice versa. And large and small organizations can work together to improve lives everywhere. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now and we can continue the discussion.
Diksha, would you like to take over at this stage? Where is Diksha? I think she's not here. So
Hi. So yeah, I loved your talk. I was fortunate enough, thanks to Kalpana 1.0, that I was the part of SDG 2020. I got to work with Makers Asylum. So I'm someone who's interested in environmental science and sustainable development. So I got to learn a lot, and we made this game, a card game, inclusive card game about carbon footprints and as such, so the children can play and learn about environment crisis and all of that. So yeah, some of these examples were very inspiring, very motivating. I did realize that you don't necessarily have to have a background of robotics or something fancy to do something with the resources you have, the things you have. Right now we are in lockdown, and we were considering the oxygen kit program of Makers Asylum. So yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I really liked it.
Thank you, Diksha. That's very kind of you to say. And I'm really delighted that you know about Makers Asylum. You were part of the SDG school and that you came up with that interesting idea solution with your team. I think there are a couple more questions. I see some hands are raised. Rashmi Kumari has a hand up. Blessing Sanjeev has his hand up. Darshana, do you want to ask them to ask that question? Maybe starting with Rashmi?
yeah, Rashmi, go ahead. Ask your question.
Yes, good afternoon, sir, ma'am. My question is, can Jugaad be our answer to the problems we face? Hello.
Rashmi, we lost you completely. Can you try again? If not, then type
Uh,
in the WhatsApp group. I'll repeat for you.
Ma'am, my question is that can Jugaad be our answer to the problems we face?
Well, it's one answer. So, given that we are so good at Jugaad, it's worth trying, worth tapping into that kind of native ingenuity, which has often been our only solution, particularly when we are in a time of crisis, and when we have limited resources, whether it's money or technology or time. So I would say, particularly when there are these kinds of resource constraints, Jugaad is a helpful solution. But it's not the only solution, and there may be times when we have more resources, we have better resources, and we don't need it. And in fact, where Jugaad may be counterproductive. So I think it's like a tool in your toolbox, and you need to understand how it is, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it. So, for instance, sometimes, as I said, in the front end of any innovation process, when you're experimenting, it's a bit messy. You want to get an answer quickly. You don't have much time. You don't want to spend too much time, and you don't want to spend too much money. That's when Jugaad can be very helpful. But then once you get a basic idea and you want to make it better, you want to improve it, you want to scale it, then maybe Jugaad is not so relevant. You have to have more structured processes. Maybe you want to have a proper R&D team. Maybe you want to patent something to protect your intellectual property. Then when you're actually commercializing, then again there may be elements where Jugaad is helpful when you want to try out what kind of business models work if you're being entrepreneurial. But once you get the idea and you want to scale that idea, again you might require structured processes. So it's a part of your toolkit. You could think of it like a screwdriver, and maybe there are other tools like hammers, and you want to know what does the screwdriver do, when should we use it, and when should we not use it.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jaideep. I think we have next is Blessing Sanjeev. And if girls, if there are other questions, please raise your hand so that we can call your names.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Sir, I just want to know about the relevance of MBA program for someone with a science or technology background to come up with an innovation and deal with the marketing. Or is it necessary, or we can do it without an MBA?
Great question. Very good, because this is what I teach, and many of our students are doing MBAs. Some of them are, many of them I would say are engineers or have a technical background, but some of them are not, do not have a technical background. And we have some who are doing a full-time MBA, that is over a whole year, and some are doing a part-time MBA. They're actually working and they cannot come for a full year. They can only come now and then at the end of every month for a weekend, and they do a lot of their work online. We also have part-time programs on entrepreneurship, specifically for people who want to be entrepreneurs. Now, I would say that those kinds of degrees are useful because they can prove to the world that you have that knowledge. And of course, they're also very practical. As I said, many of our programs, all our programs will have some practical components where you are actually working on live projects with diverse groups to solve problems, applying business principles. So, it's a very good way to formally learn about business and how technology can be commercialized. But you do not have to learn that way. Increasingly, I would say there are a lot of opportunities for you to learn more flexibly and based on your needs. So let's say you have already set up a company, or you want to set up a company. You do not have to register for an MBA program, even a part-time one. There are many courses you can take online these days, short courses. Some of them are free, taught by very good people who will explain to you how you should manage the finances of a business, or how you should manage your team, or how you should do marketing. And of course, the best university is the university of life, where you actually try and do something and you learn, often by failing, but you learn. And so I would say, yes, you can get all these skills by going to a university and formally registering and getting a degree, an MBA or a master's. But you can also learn by doing, taking short courses online that are relevant to your problem as you encounter the problem in your business.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So we have next Mahajan Jayanti and then Anshika after that.
Hello, my name is Jayanti, and I wanted to ask. So a lot of people in India have access to smartphones and technologies, especially where rural India didn't have a lot of exposure. Now it does, and they are using it. So in my locality, farmers started using WhatsApp. They created WhatsApp groups for the urban areas, and they came and sell their fruits and vegetables during the time of COVID. And women also, when we ran out of masks, they started making masks at home using whatever they had. Does this count as frugal innovation? Also, I wanted to ask, how does social media help in selling and marketing the frugal innovation?
Great questions, both of them. So, absolutely, it's frugal innovation because those farmers were doing a new kind of jugaad. They now have access to smartphones. That is a resource. Before, they may not have had them. Now they have it. And then they have WhatsApp. And then they realize very quickly they can then get information on customers in cities, what they need. They can respond to those very quickly. They can get an access to the market, route to the market, and they can get a form of livelihood. So that is a great example of Jugaad, using new technology, but with the old mindset of using what you have. You mentioned WhatsApp. WhatsApp itself is a Jugaad. So 4 guys in less than a year with a relatively small amount of seed funding created WhatsApp by connecting what was already on the phone. They saw, okay, people have smartphones, and in the phone, you have your address book, all the contacts, you have a camera, you have a keyboard. So you can join all that and do a much better form of messenger service or texting. And they were able to join the dots using what is already there and create something that had huge value to millions, hundreds of millions of people. So that's absolutely a very good jugaad. Then you mentioned social media. So, social media is potentially a huge boon, a godsend for small companies. I mentioned the students from Northwestern Design for America who made that swipe sense, that device for doctors and nurses. They could not set up a sales force, that would require a lot of money and people. Instead, they just used Amazon to distribute it, if you consider that a social media platform, some kind of digital platform. But also, they didn't have money for advertising. They could not pay to get a TV ad or radio ad. Instead, they just used Twitter to spread the word. A lot of journalists found out what they were doing. They thought this is amazing. They got a lot of press attention. And they also did a TED Talk, which went viral on social media. So social media like Facebook, it supports so many hundreds of thousands of small businesses that would not be able to afford to advertise and would not be able to reach that market. They can now reach it on social media. So I would totally include smartphones, WhatsApp, social media as a resource that can be used to do Jugaad, especially on the commercialization side.
Thank you, Jaideep. The next question is from Anshika, and I think perhaps the last question today because it's already slightly over the time. So, Anshika, go ahead, your question.
Good evening, sir. So my question is, can we look frugal innovation as a tool for sustainable development in future or like in marketing? Since what I understood from this series is that marketing is also part of important part of frugal innovation, if I'm right.
Absolutely. So, innovation, we should have I should have defined it at the start. What do I mean by innovation? Innovation is the application or implementation of new ideas. So it's not just having a new idea, it's the application or implementation of the idea. And in some cases, that is it's the commercialization of the idea. That is actually making money or generating revenues or profits. It doesn't have to be. You can have social businesses or NGOs who innovate in order not to make money, but to solve a social problem. But in either of those cases, whether you're making money or solving a social problem, innovation is actually implementing or applying an idea. Now, that means that you have to do the marketing or the business side of it. You have to know whose problem you're solving. You have to communicate to them that you're solving that problem with your solution. You have to explain to them or at least make them aware that the solution is relevant to their problems. So that is marketing. That's the business side. You will have to convince them that the price is worth paying, all that kind of stuff. But there's a technical side too, because if you think about Harish Hande, yes, he had to understand the needs of the fruit cart vendor, what she was able to pay, how she would pay, and so on. But he also had to understand and do frugal innovation on the supply side in terms of his solution. He had to think about what are the technologies that can be used in a robust, affordable way. Like how can I use solar panels, the batteries, lights, etc. So innovation is the combination of technology and market. It requires an understanding of marketing, but it also requires an understanding of technology. So with your strong technical backgrounds, you can, with a little bit of commercial knowledge and insight and a little bit of practical application by doing it yourself, you can have what is needed to be a very successful innovator in the world. You will have the knowledge of the business side, the entrepreneurship side, but you will also have the knowledge of the technical side. And that is why I think this program is so important and so valuable. And we have many similar programs here in Cambridge and in the UK. So I'm delighted that you have this program in India as well.
Thank you, Jaideep. I know we are above time, so that's why I'm telling there were 3 more questions. So I will take it a pause for now. I think we are already about 5 minutes over the time. So if you want, we can go ahead with these 3 questions. Otherwise, I can bring it to a close. I'll leave it to you. So
I can take a few more questions. I'll have to leave in about 5 minutes because I have another meeting right after that. So let's go for another 5 minutes and then close.
So Andrea, I think, has a question here. So Andrea, you can unmute yourself. And there is one more question that came on WhatsApp, which is, can we make science study easier by using Kabhad se Jugaad? I think we can absolutely make it, and you will see it later in the program. So I'm scaring, like if you want to add anything, Jaideep, to this point. So we will be involving some bits of this Kabhad se Jugaad for making science interesting in the later parts of the program at our end.
Wonderful.
So, Andrea, you want to ask question?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, it's just a thought that came into mind. Like, we are using many frugal innovation in field of healthcare, like you have mentioned that fetal health monitor, but still, like, these are not perfect. Like, it has some limitations, no? So it's mainly for people who cannot afford ultrasound scanning. So if rural people started relying on this too much, and like they it may cause problem as it is related to a life of person. So is
Yes.
it a
Yes, this is a very good question and a very important one, and it's linked to the question, that was asked at the start about perfect or the best, Now, of course, ideally, you would want to have the best solution, the perfect solution, particularly in areas like healthcare, because health is so important and life is so important and fragile. So, you wouldn't want to, if it is your own family, your own parents, or your own children, or your brother or sister, you wouldn't want a substandard solution for them. You would want the best. But, in many cases, practical realities intervene. We cannot have the best because we don't have the time or the resources. And in trying to get the best sometimes, or only settling for the best, we end up having nothing. And it's in a situation like that where good enough is the best. Because if you have nothing, then something is better than nothing. Of course, the best is better than something, but something is better than nothing. So that is a judgment that you have to make. And as I said, Jugaad is a tool, and you have to use it judiciously. You have to use it at the right time, in the right place, for the right reason. And it cannot become the permanent solution either, because you can always improve even upon, especially upon a Jugaad. So keep that in mind, I would say. And it's very important, especially with healthcare, that whenever you come up with even a Jugaad solution, you then try and perfect it. You have to do the clinical trials, you have to do the testing, you have to prove that it has basic efficacy. Without that, you are in a world of quacks. And, as scientists and technicians, you do not want to be in a world of quacks.
Thank you, Jaideep. That was very insightful. Like, let perfection not be the enemy of progress. And I think that's a rule we should, we should follow, and we should do design, iterate, and design, test, and iterate, so that we are continuously improving on it, and rather than just getting the perfect product out and
Absolutely.
like years not making any progress. So
Absolutely. That's beautifully put, Darshana. It's an iterative process. So the first thing, maybe something quick and dirty, but you can improve on it. The idea is constantly improving and not waiting till you have the perfect solution to try it out. Try out even with the beta. This is how software companies do. They are in permanent beta. So they come up with a beta solution. It's not perfect. They try it out, they find bugs, they keep improving it, and it's in permanent beta. So that is the philosophy.
thank you, Jaideep, for such a lovely session, and like the insightful talk that you gave and the discussion that followed. I'm sure many of the girls that attended the talk today, along with the mentors, like you saw some of the mentors are also here from across the globe, and I'm sure all of them found this talk very, very insightful, and they are all charged up to progress with the rest of the program, because this is just the first week where we have your keynote, and we had another inaugural address 2 days ago. So thank you again. We are really grateful to you for your time and the wonderful talk that you presented today. And yeah, hope to have you around more often then.
Yeah. So thank you, Darshana. I think this is, as I said, a wonderful program and initiative. I thoroughly enjoyed. I was so inspired by the session, the questions, the engagement. I think this is so important what you're doing. I want to wish all the students and mentors, all the best, especially now in this very challenging time for India. Let's see what you can do, and I would be very interested to stay in touch and be involved.
Thank you. Thank you again, Jaideep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and
Take care. Have a good day.
take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. And girls, I'm here. If you have any questions, Jaideep has left the session. I hope you enjoyed. What did you think of the session today? Do share your comments, and I can see someone clapping. So yeah, so please send your comments in the WhatsApp group if you want, and I will be sharing a feedback form with all of you, which will have the questions for the last session and this session. If anybody has any questions regarding the format of the program, I'm happy to sort of answer your questions. You must have seen that I did share a brochure in the program, in the WhatsApp group 2 days ago. So if you have any questions regarding that brochure also, I'm happy to answer. Please unmute yourself and ask question. Otherwise, the session is over. Anybody who wants to go can go, and those who have questions, they can stay back. And thank you, Diksha, for co-moderating the session with me. Sorry, I forgot to thank you. I hope you are still here. So thanks a lot, Diksha. You did a fabulous job. And this is again another part of the program, Kalpana, that we want you all to take things into your hand and so that you run the activities in the program. And as Diksha, she was a former Kalpana fellow, and she did a fabulous job today. So thank you, Diksha, for
Thank you, Dee.
thanks a lot.
I
And
enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, you guys should also ask questions. Don't hesitate. It doesn't matter because we all know English is our second language or probably third. So don't hesitate. Just ask it.
Okay, good. I'm getting lots of comments in the WhatsApp group. Great. Thank you. So, any questions regarding the program as such? Like, so now you all are introduced to your mentors. You can start interacting in the WhatsApp group this week. Like, I mean, the next 2 days are all about getting to know each other. So, mentors may also ask you some questions. But I think from the weekend onwards, we will have one-to-one sessions with the mentor, not one-to-one, but yeah, in groups of 5 with the mentors, where you will have more time to learn and engage from them. So, and I see some of the mentors are also here. If anybody wants to ask anything, I'm here. Otherwise, have a good evening, and please don't feel obligated to be here. Yes, please, Rashmi, ask question.
Ma'am, my question is that I have completed my graduation from chemistry. Hello,
Uh-huh.
ma'am, you got my voice?
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to know that what are the best career options from the chemistry which gives me shape of my career and outcomes.
So, okay. Anybody who has questions similar to Rashmi's question, I know some of you asked similar questions to ma'am also last week. So, the idea behind program Kalpana is to get you to this clarity. Rashmi, that's a question that cannot be answered in a minute or something. Okay, I may say, hey Rashmi, go and write JAM exam, go and write NET, GATE, whatever, or take an admission into an MSc program, or think if you would like to do an MTech after that, or a PhD, or like if you would like to take a job, or would you like to do a B.Ed or something. There's so many possibilities which can be mapped. So the program is about helping you find you are here and where should you go. And if you first part of the mentoring, like where you will define your end goal, where you want to go, and then the next stage is you will find the path, how you get to that path. Okay, so you will learn this thing in precisely this thing in the program, in the next 3-4 weeks. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes, please. Who's this? Ashi. Okay, go ahead, Ashi.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can we get the recording of this session?
Yes. So the thing is, like, we will be putting up this session as well as the previous session on our YouTube channel. We've been a bit